I'm going to show you how my love of films changed the way that I photograph people. I used to avoid photographing people. Taking photos of strangers felt awkward, and I was always really worried that I'd get caught. But then I changed my process, and it completely transformed my photography. In this video, I'll let you know the principles I developed to get shots like these, and how my gear choices, including the addition of cinema style anamorphic lenses, and my editing approach help shape these images. And toward the end of the video, I'll share the special ingredients you need to make your images look like they come straight off a movie set. When I watch movies, there are certain scenes that really stick in my mind from a visual point of view. These scenes, the ones that speak to me most, are the ones where characters have a connection with the place that they're in. And these places are often pretty epic. They're the kind of places that the landscape photographer in me is really drawn to. One of my first proper photo trips was to Iceland in 2015, and it was shortly after the movie Interstellar was released. Interstellar was filmed primarily in Iceland, and that movie, I remember, was in my mind the whole time I was shooting there, influencing the decisions I made. I didn't have the skill level at the time to kind of recreate anything on the scale I wanted to, but I remember it having a big influence on what I wanted to shoot while I was there. I did just come across this image though that I took on that same trip, and I totally forgot about this. This is probably the first example I've got of an image shot in the way I'm describing in this video. As I've improved as a photographer, I've let more of these influences in, and showing this connection between people and places is something I'm trying to do more of. By borrowing ideas from the greatest cinematographers, I've been able to start building a collection of images that I feel like could be straight from a movie. The inspiration I take from these movies is probably fairly generalized. I'm not looking at specifics and trying to recreate them. I'm just trying to allow it to influence my ideas and thoughts when I'm engaged in the photographic process. There's a number of movies though that my brain keeps returning to. Most of these are movies that I enjoy anyway, but they're primarily movies that come to mind when I typically consider the sort of visuals that I'm most drawn to. To understand more about the choices and creative decisions made by cinematographers, DPs, directors and movie art teams, I've added a couple of books to my collection for some of the most visually inspiring films I've seen recently. The first one is The Photography of Dune, and the second one is The Art and Soul of Blade Runner 2049. I've used these not just for further inspiration, but to study how filmmakers use scale, isolation, the environment, light, framing, and atmosphere. The shots that speak to me most of all are the ones where subjects are isolated. Photo books are such a great way to learn from the greats, and adding these movie-based versions has helped me to think about these kind of scenes as a cinematographer rather than someone who just shoots stills. Firstly, what do I look for when I'm trying to shoot images like this? Well, the first and main thing is an element of mystery. This is an intrigue that pulls viewers into a shot. I typically try and do this by removing identity, hiding the subject's face. My favourite ways of doing this are through silhouettes, having a small presence in a vast scene, or positioning myself so as to obscure the face in another way. This tends to work because it invites the viewer to fill in the gaps in the story by using their imagination. If you do that by showing the identity of the person in the image, typically I find those images to be a lot less compelling. This isn't a conversation about portraits and showing faces or anything like that. This is purely how I try and make my images look like they're from a movie. Next is the environment in which these images are shot. Typically, I want something that looks really visually impressive. I'm slowly building confidence and adapting to shoot more intimate scenes, which typically require more thought in terms of creating mystery and the impact of lighting as well. Light is also a really important factor, specifically in terms of how it shapes the scene. If you're primarily leaning on the use of silhouettes to conceal identity, then backlighting is absolutely key for this, as an example. I tend to look at light as more of a way of conveying mood rather than illuminating different parts of the scene as you would as maybe a landscape or an architectural photographer. Then there's the use of atmosphere and weather, and movies are packed full of atmosphere. Obviously, we've no control over this kind of thing, so this is more luck of the draw. But the shots that stand out more to me are the ones that have a lot of atmosphere in them. And to have success, you normally need a combination of some or potentially even all of these things. this is definitely a case of more is more. In terms of gear, all the images shown in this video are shot on a variety of different cameras and a number of different lenses, so it doesn't matter what you are using when you are trying to create images like this. The most important thing is that you've got a camera on you, because so many of these photos were shot reactively. They were shot at times where I wasn't necessarily there to be fully engaged in photography, but I had a camera on me, so I was able to capture what was going on. It's these moments in between that have given me so many good images over the last 18 months. And that's actually something I'm going to speak about more in next week's video, so make sure you're subscribed if you want to see that. But something I've been trying recently to help me think more like a filmmaker are these anamorphic lenses from Sirui. They sent me a full frame 35mm lens and an APS-C 20mm lens to try out. I don't shoot on an APS-C camera, but the A7R5 can punch into Super 35 mode, so I was able to use this. The reason I got both is one is an autofocus lens and one is a manual focus lens. So these are typically for filmmaking, so why have I tried them for photography? Well, I wanted to try and get more of a, dare I say it, cinematic feel. When you shoot with one of these, the shot is wider than the equivalent focal length standard lens on the same sensor. Yeah, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me either. Basically, the way this lens works is it covers more horizontal space, but the same amount of vertical space. If you look at these two images, both shot at 35mm of the same scene, you can see that the one shot on the anamorphic lens is a great deal wider than the one shot on the standard lens. However, they are pretty much the same height. This extra width means you can show more of the environment, and that is kind of what I'm trying to achieve with a lot of these images. Anamorphics also have their characteristic flare, as demonstrated quite considerably by people like J.J. Abrams. Now, you can get these lenses in a neutral flare or a blue flare. Although the blue flare did seem tempting because, well, it looks cool, I thought for my use, the neutral flare probably would be a bit less distracting. Shooting with these has been a strange experience. Because you are getting a wider image, to fit it into the sensor and onto the screen, the image is basically squeezed and looks really distorted. So when you are shooting, it's quite hard to compose and tell exactly what's going on because it looks so distorted. Because the image is squeezed, you then de-squeeze in post. So it's actually quite a nice surprise to see what the image looks like later on when you get it into your computer. But with it being squeezed on screen like this, it does take a little bit of getting used to. As I said, I've been using these on my A7R5. The FX3 that I use for filming actually has a built-in de-squeeze, so you can see the correct representation of the image on that, but it's 12 megapixels, so it's not the best stills camera, and it doesn't have the APS-C punch-in shooting, so I couldn't really use this on it. The problem I've got is they have a very intentional use case. I'm not sure you'd keep one of these on your camera as a walk around lens, and that's generally what I like to the most. I don't like stopping and changing lenses all the time. So how it fits into my workflow, I need to spend a bit more time with them, and also probably go to some more places with incredible scenery where I can really put these to the test. But they're pretty cool lenses, and I like how the images out of them look. I think using them sparks creativity and it encourages that filmmaker mindset. Now, this isn't sponsored by Sirui at all. They have said I can keep one of these lenses, and I've still not decided which one it is. Makes sense to keep the 35mm because it's full frame. However, the manual focus makes it a little more difficult to use than the autofocus one. The images I've been showing here have been examples I've shot with these over the last 6 weeks. I definitely need to use these more because I'm not convinced these are the best examples. Sometimes conditions aren't on your side, but I've tried to put the principles in place that I've spoke about earlier in these images. In terms of editing, I typically edit these kind of images very similarly to how I edit most of my other images. I've got a set of presets that I use. There's a link to them below if you're interested. But I tend to use these as a base whenever I start my editing and just make a few tweaks from there. I typically like these images to be a little softer and achieve that by lowering the clarity and the contrast and the sharpness a bit. Sometimes I like to add a little bit of grain, bit of a vignette, maybe soften the blacks a bit just to give it that slight movie style look. I should probably add as well that over the last 18 months, I've been shooting quite a lot with a 10% diffusion filter or glow mist filter, and this helps to get that kind of movie style glow. You can achieve this in post as well, and there's loads of videos out there telling you how to do this. It's purely a creative choice, but it's one that I like to use. And I should just end editing by talking about crops. Typically when people speak about movie-like images, it's generally a letterbox or a 16:9 crop, but it doesn't have to be limited to this. You can put all these principles in place and come out with a vertical image, and that's something I've done quite a few times, and I actually quite like how this looks. I mentioned earlier when I spoke about the process that the more elements of mystery and atmosphere and everything else that you can include in a shot, the more like a movie it's going to feel. But there are some things you can do, little changes you can make that will make the difference between an image working and not working. Firstly, when it comes to including people, think about the amount of people. I typically try and stick to just having one person in the frame to have that element of mystery like I spoke about. The actions of this person are also incredibly important. If they're doing something really obvious, take this shot for example, this woman is clearly taking a photo out to sea. So that takes away the ability for you to create a story in your mind. You know what she's doing despite it having mystery through the silhouette. Compare it to this one of the same lady and she's doing something different. She's looking at her phone. She's not engaged with the scene. Why isn't she? What's going on? What's she doing right now to be looking at a screen rather than looking at the sunrise and out to this beautiful calming sea? So think about what the people are doing in your scene, and this often does require a little bit of patience. If you are going to shoot multiple people, I feel like they need either some sort of connection between them or an obvious source of tension between them. That allows you to come up with the story as you're viewing the image. If there isn't this connection or tension, you struggle to know what the story is, therefore the image isn't quite as compelling and we move on. Framing is also really important, where you position the subject in the frame, and this can depend on the scene entirely. Sometimes I like to have it quite central, sometimes to the side, sometimes balanced with another object in the scene. Think about what to include in the image and more importantly, what to obscure, what aren't you showing. Quite often what you don't show is key to the intrigue and the story that you're trying to tell. I think the really good movie-like images often work with or without people. People are like the finishing touch. They're what takes some images from being, oh that's nice, to, oh wow. Few examples of this are, again, this shot of the mountains. It's a nice shot without the people in, but you put the people in and all of a sudden it can remind you of a scene from a movie like Everest or something like that. This is a shot of a building in the fog and it's got a great amount of mystery to it. There was no person here for this, but if you were to imagine a person in that scene, it would add so much more to it. And you can use all this and take it further. You don't have to include people to actually make it feel like a movie either. Different signs of life, signs of activity will also help you achieve this. If there's an implied human presence in a scene, that's often enough to make a compelling image. Things like houses with lights on, cars and headlights, clues to previous occupants. It makes the viewer come up with all sorts of stories in their head, which is what makes these images compelling. A lot of the stuff needed to create these images is patience and luck. And I think luck often comes with being out more and more and more. I've not got loads of images like this, and none of them are planned. They're all sort of fairly chance happenings. I don't know exactly the conditions I'm going to experience, and I don't know if people are going to be in the right place at that time. So you have to be ready for them. Being ready just comes from being out there and being engaged in photography. When you're not out shooting, allow these influences in. Study movies a bit more from a visual perspective than maybe you're used to. Look at books, take influences from loads of different sources, and this will just help you with more creative ideas when you're out in the field. I hope that's been helpful. I hope it's something that you feel like you'd like to try out yourself. I'd love to know which of the images have spoken to you the most in this, which make you ask the most questions, and I'd love to see you try things out like this yourself. And if you do that, post them on Instagram and tag me, because I'd love to see the results of what you guys do. As always, appreciate everyone that watches my videos. Thank you so much, and I will see you in the next one.